Thank you everyone for joining. I'm personally super excited about this session. We're going to talk about how to accelerate the transition to renewable energy with our partner Ever.green. My name is Jason Parkin. I'm the President and Chief Creative Officer of a digital strategy and creative services agency called Compose. We are, folks at SEBA confirm this for me, we are the smallest company in the country to do a virtual power purchase agreement. So we're super excited to sort of share what our process was like for that and how our partner Michael from Ever.green was able to enable that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm Michael Leggett. I'm the co-founder and head of product at a company called Ever.green. There are a lot of Ever.greens. We're the only Ever.green. And we are a marketplace for what we call high impact RECs and transferable tax credits. And we're going to try to pack basically 2 talks into one today. We're going to talk about how you can both buy or sell tax credits or RECs. How can you use them? Or if you can't use them, how can you actually maybe pass them on to someone else who can use them and get the cash? So lots to cover.
I also just want to add, fully aware that RECs can often be seen as a 4-letter word. And so really excited as far as the differentiation between the high impact RECs that Michael and Ever.green are doing and why that really does have material impact on standing up new projects.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So let's jump in. Oh, pushing the wrong button. There we go. So I think, context, we all know climate change is still outpacing climate action. And we're not on the path to 2 degrees yet. We still have a ways to go as far as the gap between kind of current policies and where we need to be. Energy is a huge percentage of global emissions. Now, this is all forms of energy, including oil and gas and other things. But as we move to electrify the world, more and more of that will come from electricity. The Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., fantastic and helps get us further, is not enough on its own. And it is not an automatic win. It's not just going to poof magically make all this stuff happen. It really is depending on massive participation from companies and project developers. And finally, it's not just about where we get it, it's also about how fast we get there. Velocity matters. The sooner we get there, the fewer cumulative emissions there are in the atmosphere and in our oceans that we have to then try to figure out how to pull back out. Renewables today generates about 17% of electricity in the US. And you can see the blue line, renewables are growing. It's great, fantastic, but so is natural gas. And natural gas, especially when you also think of when you incorporate in fugitive emissions, methane there can be just as dirty as coal. So we have a lot of work to do to start getting these things to trend in the right way. Bottom line is kind of context for this. Renewable energy is a massive lever, and it is growing, but it's still not growing fast enough, and you can make it go faster. I think that's kind of the big thing we want to hammer on today. So how can you help? Fundamentally, I think there's 2 ways you can help make it go faster. You can either build renewable energy projects on site in your communities, in your cities, or you can support them somewhere else. And you can support them in your cities and your communities. You can also support them elsewhere. And those might be even more impactful. We're going to talk about different paths there as well. So when you build them, you're having a direct impact on emissions. And there's this lovely word, and I'm going to try not to hammer on this too much. How many, well, actually, I should have asked this at the beginning. How many of you are with cities or governments in the room? Show of hands. Ton. Awesome. How many of you are with companies in those cities? Awesome. So I think that, whoops, how do I go back? Okay, go back. So I think both cities and companies can have an impact directly. You can build projects locally, and when you're paying to build those, there's no question about the impact you're having. You're building projects, that's putting clean energy on the grid, and that is helping us move things forward. When you are a company, you can build, or a city, you can build something that is not on site, not maybe even inside your city. It's further away. Maybe it's a community solar project that's outside of town. Maybe it's in another state. How does that work? And so the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which governs kind of how entities, both companies and cities, are meeting their sustainability goals, allows for broad market definitions, basically allows you to take credit for projects built elsewhere. And so our company and our customers care very, very deeply. When you do that, to be very, very thoughtful and make sure that you're having an impact. So we break this down in impact into two different pieces. The impact you as a company or the city are having on those projects if you're not building them directly yourself, and the impact the project is having on the planet. And sometimes people love to tell the stories about this and cover up the lack of impact over here. And that really grinds my gears. So like, oh, look, there's a bee pollinator, and oh, look, there's this great program for the school, and those things are wonderful. But if you're just taking credit for a project that already happened or already was going to happen, taking a free ride, you're not actually fixing the fundamental problem we're trying to fix. So, and I also want to acknowledge this stuff is not an exact science. There's a spectrum of impact in both of these buckets that you can have on projects and that projects can have on a planet. There's a lot of ways to do this. This stuff can get really, really complicated if you wanted to. So just to kind of acknowledge that it's not precise. So going a little bit deeper on what impact can you have on enabling a project if it's not necessarily built, or even if it is built directly. So I think there's really two paths. You can either be the project's customer and make it attractive to fund, right? Projects, they have basically two things to sell. And there's more, but again, I'm oversimplifying pretty much this whole thing. They have energy, and they have the certificates that are attributed to the energy being clean, or a renewable energy certificate. How many people have never heard of a renewable energy certificate, or a REC? Fantastic. So I have some like choose your own adventure, some slides we're just going to skip later. That is great. Okay, so they have those two things, and what makes when you really dig into project financing, and how do we make more projects happen? If you want to accelerate it, the transition, you want to make more projects happen, you want to get into what makes projects financially viable, what goes into a financial model. And I can tell you, we've looked at project financial models when they are playing in voluntary markets and they're just selling the RECs annually for $1, maybe $2 a REC. That's a pittance in the financial model as far as the impact. And we'll get to that a little bit more later. So when you are the customer, you're either saying, I will buy the energy or I will buy the RECs at a meaningful price. And what makes that impactful is when you are signing a long-term commitment up front before the project's financed. Right? That long-term commitment is taken to the investors, it's taken to the banks. It said, hey look, I'm going to be able to sell this thing. I've got a 25, 30-year asset that is producing unknown and variable amounts of energy at variable times. There's a lot of risk there, and what the projects crave is certainty to de-risk the project. And so this is where cities and community solar, the whole game here is signing long-term contracts for the power of the RECs. Everybody with me? I'm seeing head nodding, yes. Am I like telling y'all stuff? Everyone's like, we already know this. Okay, cool. So we wrote a whole paper about this. This is really a concept called additionality. This is really kind of causation by someone who's taking credit for the environmental impacts. And I have lovely arguments with some people who are like, that's the wrong term, or that's not appropriate here, or it doesn't apply to RECs. I say to hooey with all that. I think it does apply. And I think it is ill-defined. Acknowledge that traditionally it is not applied to RECs. It's not a requirement in the greenhouse gas protocol, so this is us going above and beyond saying, if you want to take credit for something, here's what we think should kind of be involved. And so I think a lot of companies and cities want to cause things. They want to be able to say they cause things. And so we want to try to kind of get really crisp on what does it take to do that. So we wrote a whole paper about that. Not going to cover the whole paper or pretty much any of it. We're going to skip that one. I'm going to skip to the simple version of this one. There are basically, there's two ways to build renewables. You can build it on site, or you can kind of support a project off site. And really there's three ways to do that when it goes off site. You're either buying the RECs annually in kind of a spot market, and in voluntary markets, again, that averages about $1 or $2 a REC, very, very little. You're signing some kind of forward contract, a power purchase agreement, a virtual power purchase agreement. There are even really long REC strips at the right kind of terms and price, at the right timing can be really impactful. Or maybe you're doing some kind of green tariff with the utility. And the green tariff is just a proxy for one of these two. Utility is probably doing one of these two things behind it, and the different utilities are varying degrees of transparency on what's actually happening behind the scenes. I'm going to skip that one. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Jason. Upgrade the presentation very soon here. Okay. So I've given variations of the talk at a couple different conferences, and one thing I kept hearing is it's as far as feedback is it is too abstract. And so this is the part of the thing I'm going to try to make it a little bit more concrete. There is a off-the-shelf, NREL makes this SAMS, System Advised Model. It's kind of one of the standard models. And so we took the standard model, put in some basic assumptions, and said, well, what does the $1 REX do for that project? So I just want to prove it to you so you don't have to take my word for it. It does next to nothing. It's 0.07% of the revenue for that project. It bumps up the IRR, which is basically how much the investor is going to make on that. This is unlevered, so it could be more. Not much. Well, what if I say, well, it's $2, I'm going to get those for 10 years. It's still not much. And let's say, what will often happen is the investor will have a hurdle rate in mind. They'll say, I want to make at least 7% on this to say yes, to be able to say, let's fund this project, let's build it. So if you're trying to get to that 7%, you're either saying, I need to sell the energy for more, which might increase utility rates, or I need to sell these RECs for more. So what's it take to get to that 7%? $10 for 10 years, still not there, 4.5%. It took $23 a REC for 10 years, or $18 for 15 years. It takes a lot more than $1 a year. It just takes a lot to make this stuff happen. And it absolutely can vary. This is a set of assumptions on costs and parameters. And so there's a lot that goes into this. I would say there's just a lot that goes into this. But I would say generally we see anywhere from like $10 to $40 a REC on a 5 to 15 year contract to really have that kind of impact and help make a project happen. Quick question?
Yeah, I'm more familiar with the carbon pricing market, with compliance markets and free markets.
Yes, this is all in the voluntary market. So compliance, REC markets are already kind of there.
Okay.
So I think, go to Jersey, and it's like $400 a REC. So I think that you can charge on voluntary markets, which is a big chunk. The voluntary market, just to give you a picture, there's over 300,000 companies participating in the voluntary REC market. Of that 300,000, guess what percentage of those companies are signing long-term contracts to help make projects happen? Take a wild guess. Any numbers? 1%. It is 0.4%. Those buyers are huge, though. They make up 40 to 50% of the market. So I don't want to make this sound worse than it is. It's the Amazons and the Starbucks and the Googles. I'm not saying those companies do everything perfectly, but they've done a lot to go and say, hey, we want to have more impact instead of just buying these unbundled RECs. And they sign these massive contracts. The problem is other companies can't follow them. We have companies as big as $50 billion tech companies that spend years trying to do what they do and say, we're just not big enough. A $50 billion tech company is not big enough. How the heck are you going to have cities and smaller businesses? How are we going to broaden participation when it's so inaccessible? Okay, almost there. As far as the impact the project has on the planet, there are so many dimensions of this, and I'll say that we try to set a minimum bar and be really thoughtful on this. We have a whole scoring framework on that. I thought this would just be kind of fun to speak to on average. So we actually, as part of our services, we estimate this for every single REC, every single hour, and this fluctuates like every 5 minutes. As far as what is the impact, the environmental impact on emissions of adding clean energy at a certain point at a time and place. So if you add something in Southern California, on average, and again, this is fluctuating. It can go down to 0, it can go up quite a bit. On average, annual average on a solar, so this is taking a solar profile of energy, it's about 0.3 tons per megawatt hour avoided. So you're looking at what's on the margin. You're saying, if that wasn't there, what would it have picked up? Would it have been a peaker plant? Would it have been coal? Would it have just been other renewables filling the spot? If we go over to West Texas, it's still about half a ton per megawatt hour on average. If you go up here into Colorado and Wyoming, it jumps up to almost a ton per megawatt hour. But what's interesting is you go into Excel, other parts of Colorado, and it drops. And you see where different utilities having different priorities plays out. This whole other region is about 0.67. So the impact on global emissions fluctuates from location to location, from time to time. It's not a fixed thing. It's going to continue to change over time. There's a lot of different kind of dimensions of this. Is all kind of what I'm trying to get at here. And you really want to think about what matters to you. Does it matter that you're building something locally and your taxpayers can see that, or your customers can see that, or maybe you want to maximize impact? There's a lot of kind of different ways to do that. All right, Jason, talk to now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so why did we choose Ever.green, and what does this look like for a small company? So just to give you a little bit of a backstory, for anyone who attended last year, you may remember the keynote speaker, Molly Kawahata. She's a friend of our company, partner, and we were having a conversation one day, and she brought up this concept to me called additionality. And so understanding that if you build renewable infrastructure where the grid is the dirtiest, you can really amplify that impact. And it mentioned that somebody may have said that the atmosphere doesn't care who claims the emissions. And so that sort of started us on our journey as far as, what can we do? We're a small company. Michael mentioned we're not a $50 billion tech company, and that even a company that size, wasn't able to do this. And so what does the VPPA look like for us? Well, when we started to look into this, I took that concept of additionality, had a great chat with folks at Watt Time. They pointed me to somebody who said, you're probably too small for them. And they said, there's this guy I met with this company, Ever.green. You might be able to find something with them. So we reached out, we had a conversation, and we started talking about this. And so what that looks like for us is 1,000 megawatt hours for 5 to 10 years. Minimum 5 can go up to 10. 1,000 megawatt hours isn't a lot. It's way more than we as 14 people on laptops with 3 of us running on renewables already produce. So our lens on this was really looking at impact and what sort of impact could we make as a small company, and us to serve as a case study as an example where, if we can do it and get in on this price, it's an option that's open to so many more people, and where we can really look to have an outsized impact as far as who we are. So that brings us to the project that we ended up funding, or that went to, called the Ocotillo Wind Farm, which is a wind farm in Big Spring, Texas. Initially when we spoke, we had talked about a small-scale solar farm in Texas on the distribution side of the grid. Got a great education about how electrical transmission works and substations and everything else. It wasn't happening until, it still hasn't quite happened yet, so as we were having conversations, we found that it's like, hey, going back to Velocity Matters, I want to be on a project that we can just get going as soon as possible, and whatever our little part can do to help facilitate that, that's great. So Michael and the folks there reached out and they said, hey, we have this repowering project that we're doing. We have this wind farm that's hit its end of life in Texas. We're seeing more of our original renewable infrastructure starting to hit its end of life. And it really just underscored the importance of, one, we need to continue to support this infrastructure because we're having stuff go offline while we're having new projects come online. We're kind of staying at a net neutral or not going at the rate we want to. Additionally, we love the circularity play here, right? Here's a program that's already connected to the grid. Minimum rights are signed. All the turbines there's no new pouring of concrete. We're losing a lot of carbon intensity that's generally attributed to building new renewable infrastructure. And so the impact of that in bringing that back online, which came back online in January of this year, was clean renewable energy to 19,000 homes in the area. Obviously not affected us, but understanding that this is emissions that we're actively reducing collectively, in an area for the grid itself. These were all photos taken when we went out to the wind farm and we shot a bunch of content here. I will confirm there were no piles of dead birds. And then what this means is that one of the things we found out about there, which I really loved, I'm sorry this isn't looping, it was supposed to keep spinning the whole time, let's keep turning. We mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act before, and one of the things that I found out about the Inflation Reduction Act, I'm not sure maybe you're all familiar with this, is that there's a production tax credit in there for $20 per megawatt hour, on top of the commitments that we've made. These turbines here can keep spinning. Okay, it sounds like everybody knows energy prices fluctuate. These turbines can keep spinning when the prices drop to as low as -30. And so before, when this plant was originally running, they were turning these turbines off once or twice a day. When we were there in April, they've only stopped them twice for the entire year. So that's what we're talking about. It's really putting genuine pressure on the fossil fuels in the area. The more that these are turning and getting these subsidies and the fossil fuel sources aren't, it's just that they're either losing money or they're having to shut off. And so with that, I'll hand it back to Michael.
This is where I have to go to the next slide to remind myself. Okay, so that's about RECs and supporting projects. Let's talk about tax credits and funding projects. This is what the capital stack used to look like. It looked like before the Inflation Reduction Act. You've got tax equity, probably about 20% of the project's funding. You've got someone investing or owning the project, maybe 20 to 40%, and then you're going to take some debt, maybe 30 to 50%. Tax equity really only going to very large banks. It's a very complicated vehicle. It's still around. It hasn't gone away. But the IRA changed some things there. This is also what the tax credits looked like before the IRA. They're going to be gone next year. And they're down to only 10% this year. So they are getting phased out, and everybody's kind of bracing for what's next. So what the Inflation Reduction Act did is not only give it another 10 years, they also jacked them way up to as high as 70%. Now what's another really cool thing is I say as high as 70%, and getting 60, 70% is pretty hard to do, but it is possible, is that they used to say every project gets the exact same tax credit. And what the government says, actually, we want to incentivize certain things. So how much you get is now going to depend on a few things. It's going to depend on how much you pay the people that build the project and maintain it. It's going to depend on you having apprentices for that. It's going to depend on where you build. Hey, we acknowledge that we're trying to transition away from fossil fuels, so let's give an extra incentive to build stuff in communities that are transitioning away from coal. So wherever coal mines were shut down or coal plants were retired, where over a certain percentage of the employees in a region are employed by fossil fuels. We'd love to make more stuff in the U.S. So if you're using things, steel, 100% steel made in the U.S., if you're using, panels or parts made in the U.S., we're going to give you an extra boost. We also like to care about who's benefiting from this. And so if you're building in low-income neighborhoods or communities, and some of the benefits are getting shared with those communities, we'll do even more. This last one you actually have to apply for, and there is a cap on it. But everything else, there's no cap. You don't have to apply. You follow the rules, and you get the benefits.
What was the energy community one?
Energy community is if you're built. Actually, I'm going to show you in just a second.
Oh.
But it's based on. It's pretty complicated. There's 3 or 4 ways you can qualify, but think of it largely as you're trying to build. Let's see. So we built this actually when the IRA came out. The very first thing we did, we're kind of a software. My background's in software. I spent 20 years in software, and spent the last 7 on climate. We basically tried to productize the Inflation Reduction Act. So we built a whole map for the IRA and made it free, and we would let developers put their projects on our map, and we notified them as things changed as the rules were coming out. The rules were basically coming out over about an 18-month period. Now we get to tell them every time that, hey, new data's come out, what qualifies is changing. So you can put in a location, and you can find out. Does it qualify or not, and why? And we actually give you the raw data so you can get a sense of how close it is to qualifying. I'm hoping that in the near future, we'll actually be able to trend this out and say, hey, we think it might qualify next year or might not qualify. So energy community is based on if you're close to where a coal plant or a coal mine was closed, that's the easiest one. There's more complicated ones where you build on a brownfield or you're building in a region where a certain percentage of the populace is employed by fossil fuels. It's kind of the short of it.
And is it only focused on energy generation, or is it also?
No, it's all kinds of stuff. There's like, we got really deep into the thick of this and actually looked at all the NCIS codes, job codes and stuff. So it's like pipelines and all kinds of things that it can be involved with. So this is, I believe, just energy community layer turned on. No, this is energy community. The last one was, that's just low-income communities, and this is actually done by census tract. This is just energy community, and this changes every year. Both of those actually change every year. Because some reason, no, they change every year. This is another layer we have. This is a fun one. These are the areas where EV chargers are going to lose their incentive at the end of this year. And if a project gets started before the end of this year, you can still get it. And if not, you don't. So this is Denver. It's not a lot of land, but it's basically inside city centers is where you don't necessarily qualify. And so we've tried to kind of be creative here and try to make it easy for you to see what qualifies as well as what's at risk of losing qualification.
Sorry, so you had a question?
Yeah. Your last slide kind of addressed it. Can you address the concept of stacking? In other words, if you got a federally based grant, does the ITC apply to the balance? Does it preclude using ITC?
I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, but I'm pretty sure you can stack them. It does apply to the grant, I believe. And so you can get to where you're almost not spending anything because the grant covered a certain percentage and the ITC covered the other side.
So it would be applying to the balance after the grant?
No, I believe it applies to the cost of the project, the total cost. I believe so. So you can kind of, it's a way of like leveraging the grant. It could almost, yeah, I don't know if you can get make money, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but yeah.
I just have a quick question about this map. So my community unfortunately is highlighted on this map, but is it an entire community that will use access, or is it just neighborhoods? Because it doesn't look like the entire community.
It's just these little like tiny census tract blocks.
Okay.
So it's just the purple, the dark purple is the only ones that are about to lose coverage. Yeah.
I don't know how much coding would be for it, but have you guys considered the USDA REAP grants, for rural communities, switching that on as a filter?
Yeah, I've got a list of like 30 layers that we've thought about.
Yeah.
That is one of them. And I'm like, I know people are looking at other things, but I also know there's other tools for some of these things. So, and the DOE's map has come along quite a ways. We updated ours within 24 hours of the last data drop from labor. It took them about 6 weeks, but it's gotten better. So I think for a while we were kind of the only game in town, and now there's just 3 games in town. But
Now, all these layers only apply to industrial projects, so putting on my own solar roof, only get 30%, right?
on a home, so actually it can apply to a home if you don't own it. So if the developer owns it, yeah. So yes, but this applies to anything down to, and there's certain rules if it's smaller than a megawatt. So it applies to on like apartment buildings, so what's called commercial and industrial. It definitely can apply to projects of all size. When you get down to putting on someone's home, if they own the system, only they can use it towards their personal taxes. Yeah.
But if you own multiple of those on a home, you can aggregate those and apply in that community.
If you're not the homeowner,
Correct.
yeah, so like if you're a developer and you own them and you're just doing PPAs with people, you absolutely can aggregate those and do this. So we'll do like portfolios of residential solar sometimes. Yeah. So the capital stack looked like this before, now it looks like this. Huge difference. And what's really cool is you can also not only, the tax credits, you can now use direct pay. So before the government said, okay, you've got to put this against your taxes. So if you're a city or a government, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a tribal nation, the government will actually just write you a check. Now everybody else that says, hey, where's my check? They say, no. What I'm going to do is you can just owe me less in taxes. And then they say, well, I don't know. Like, let's say you're building a $10 million project, you got a 50%, ITC investment tax credit. It's $5 million. I don't owe the U.S. government $5 million in tax credits. Now what? Well, you can't actually use that over the next 20 years. Well, I don't want to do that. I want the money now. Okay, I'll tell you what. You can sell the tax credit. And that's one of the big changes. One of the 3 big changes the Inflation Reduction Act did is one of them is it gave you long-term certainty, so the tax credits are now going to go longer. There's now this higher amount you can get, but it's variable, depends on how you do things. And now you can sell the tax credits. They're transferable, is the kind of the jargon. And so we are a marketplace to help projects sell their tax credits. Now, if I'm just going to sell it at face value, who's going to want to buy that? You end up selling them usually at a discount, so maybe anywhere from 80 cents to 90 cents on the dollar, sometimes more, sometimes less. whole mess of complexity there too, but we try to make that easy and turnkey. And there's other marketplaces out there as well around the tax credits. Individuals can even buy them if they're offsetting passive income. I don't see a lot of that. But this is where, and this isn't the best slide to do it on, but like, my God, if you're a city, like, go build stuff and use this. If you're a company, my God, like, buy these tax credits if you're not using them. Please, like, this is what we need. The government, basically, the story we heard is JP Morgan went and convinced Joe Manchin to not use direct pay for everyone. They were going to direct pay for everything. And they said, that's going to be such an administrative nightmare for you to make sure there's not people cheating you. So what you need to do is just let them like sell the tax credits, and the market will do the diligence for you. And I think that is, I think there's, both some interest and business and like, hey, JP Morgan getting some business there. But I also think there is some truth to, it's a line of defense of basically you're distributing the diligence on this. Our marketplace and lawyers and like everybody's on the hook if anybody's trying to cheat this system. And so there's a lot of kind of diligence that goes into making sure the tax credits are legit and being claimed legitimately. It's having an impact, right? U.S. solar panel manufacturing jumps fourfold after the IRA. You go look at First Solar is the biggest, domestic maker, and they make thin film instead of PV. They went from like going to build like one new factory to building 3 or 4. So yeah, I mean, this like astonished me. It was fairly stagnant as far as growth. It had been growing. In 2021, I think we built about 20 gigawatts of solar in the U.S. In 2022, it was 22 gigawatts or 21. I think it actually went down a little bit. In 2023, it jumped up to like 32 gigawatts. So we're seeing that growth. But again, this isn't automatic. It's not, and we need to get to much higher numbers. We need to get to, and I think I have that. Yes. The DOE has a great study on this. We need to get to like 60 gigawatts a year just from solar. We need to be building a lot more. So it's speeding up, but it's not automatic. And it's going to take all of us to use these things and make use of it. Okay. You got your own guess.
All right. So we've seen, what great work out there is to be done. We also know that while it's great to do this, as businesses, as municipalities, et cetera, it's really important to tell that story as well too. Which is where we come in. So you've done the work. Now what? Anybody else attended last year? Did a little thing about sustainable tourism and particularly to municipalities. 60% of travelers seek destinations that are actively addressing climate change. This is a great way to not only fund and really work to build infrastructure, but also to address and attract that tourist base. What we saw was that there was a pretty clear delineator between under 50 and over 50 as far as where sustainability fell into decision making. If it was town or resort A versus town or resort B, the one that was talking about their sustainability initiatives was the one that the younger audience was going to choose over the other. Initially, there's another study that says there is a 59% diminishing result from greenhushing, or not talking about your sustainability activities. This was a study that was conducted over the top 100 largest U.S. companies. I know that doesn't necessarily apply to municipalities as well too, but I think it's a pretty short line to draw between that. And then, this is what I'm going to jump to a lot because we see this a lot. Your sustainability report is not a marketing strategy. I can tell you how many brands that I'm deeply passionate about probably own too much of their stuff. I know that they're doing the right thing, and I get an email that says, hey, download our latest sustainability report. And I live and breathe this stuff. I don't want to read your sustainability report in my free time. So what that looks like is really taking that content, breaking it out into digestible, small bits of information over a period of time, and also understanding that it's a platform that should be worked in. It's not a content pillar. It's not just one thing that we're talking about here and there. It's a platform that really influences every pillar that you're speaking to, whether it's your community members, whether it is more like an internal communication for your team, whether it's city council members. It needs to be consistent all the way through. And that's really how you start to build that authenticity, how you start to build that. I know I just was reading something today, NYU Stern did a study that just came out saying that even with all the pushback, a lot of the blowback we're seeing with ESG, consumers, visitors, etc., they aren't asking for you to not talk about it. They're asking for it to be done authentically and with a lot of authenticity and transparency behind it. Because again, those are the things that resonate. They understand that, hey, you're really doing the work here. And so then, how do you message that to your key stakeholders? This was a little piece that we did around this. These are just a couple examples. This is not a whole strategy. These are just a couple points in that. But how it can work into that. And so what that looks like for the project that we did. We got some great earned media as far as Charles, which used to be Green Biz, posting about it on our own organic social channels. We're a brand alliance member with Protect Our Winners. We got a great partner and advocacy promotion from them, really building that credibility and showcasing what a small company can do, as well as a great case study that we have with Ever.green. Again, just a few touch points, but just showing how a single story can lay out across multimedia landscapes. And then we also shot a content piece about this, which we're going to play now. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. But we think it gives a nice overview of what this all looks like and how it came together.
Hi, my name is Jason Parkin. I'm president and CCO of Composed, a digital strategy and creative services agency, and we're here at the newly repowered Ocotillo Wind Farm in Big Spring, Texas. As a certified B Corp, we're always looking for ways that we can continue to improve our impact, and thanks to our partners Ever.green, we're able to take action on a systemic level by helping to facilitate utility-scale infrastructure staying online in the area.
This wind farm was brought back by Clearway Energy, our partners. I'm really excited to see these turbines spinning today. Before they got a hold of it, they were down to only 1 or 2 turbines still spinning, and the project was reaching the end of its life. And they've brought it back, and they've extended that life by 5 to 10 years.
This wind farm that we're at today is going to provide clean, reliable energy to 19,000 homes in the area and actively clean up the grid by removing the need for reliance on fossil fuels.
Texas, while they have a lot of wind and a decent amount of solar, the grid is still predominantly powered by fossil fuels here. And so we love supporting projects in places like this where we can have more impact on climate with our partners.
Until recently, a small company like ours, it's less than 20 people, had no ability to purchase the sort of high-impact RECs or renewable energy certificates that lead to the additionality that we need, unless they were some of the largest companies out there, such as Apple, Google, or Amazon. But thanks to our partners at Ever.green, they've made access to a lever of impact and change that just wasn't there before, which is why we're able to do this.
These high-impact RECs are sold via long-term contracts at a meaningful price. And so what we're doing is really democratizing access. We're letting more companies come in and participate in a more meaningful way with these projects. So what that looks like is these wind farms can run more hours of the day, more days of the year. And it actually puts more pressure on fossil fuels.
As business leaders, we have access to more of these levers than the vast majority of individuals in this country do, and I argue that we have an obligation to find and pull on as many of them as possible to create the change we want and need to see when it comes to climate.
So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
I want to add one other piece. There's another great story. You talked about additionality at the beginning of this. One of my favorites is Boston University, who very intentionally said, hey, we can support stuff in Massachusetts. I said, you know what, what we're really trying to address here is climate change. It's a global problem. So instead of building something local, we're going to go build, they narrowed it down to Texas or North Dakota, I think South Dakota. They ended up supporting a large wind farm in South Dakota. And by doing so, the emissions impact is like double what it would have been had they built something locally. So I think that I applaud those who want to build locally. I think that's fantastic. And I applaud those who want to think globally and build stuff where either the communities have been left behind or the emissions impact is greater. I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. And I hope that, I just think there's a thoughtful way to do it when you do it. Yeah.
So with that, any questions at all? Right here in the front row.
I'd be curious to learn of other cities that are using RECs this way. Like in my community, we have a stated resolution by City Council aspiring to achieve 100% carbon-free energy connected to a local distribution grid. But we have an IOU, they're not playing ball, and I need to make a case that this could be the way to go, but I would love to see who else is doing that. Anyone in the room?
Yes, we'd be happy to talk to you.
I would also, just really quickly, I love the rural electric cooperatives because it is an area where if you're looking to elect people on these co-op boards, a lot of times those elections are decided by about 20 people sometimes. So if you want somebody who's going to be a champion for climate and champion for renewables, and you are in an area that's serviced by a renewable electric co-op, get someone to run for the board because you can have some really strong impact there.
I can add that I'm the town councilman in Ridgeway and I also work for the co-op. We just got $4.5 million grants to put in microgrids, so it's nice to kind of accomplish those two things.
Love it.
I'm a total newbie here. I know nothing. This is my first exposure to it. But if you are able to, if you have tax credits that you've accumulated and you sell them through the marketplace, correct, what are the tax implications of that sale to the firm that's selling them?
So the firm that's selling tax credits, or the implications for the firm that's buying the tax credits?
How about both? I was interested in the sale party, but both.
Sure. I think the sale price, so I don't think the sale of the credits is taxed. But that's an interesting question. I don't think it's not like you have sales tax or income tax on selling the tax credits. So you have something that's worth a certain amount. Let's say your tax credit's worth $5 million, $10 million. You're going to sell that at a discount for maybe 90 cents on the dollar, $9 million. Party, some company, say Google's like, hey, I want to support that, sounds good. I've got plenty of tax liability. I'll buy them for $9 million. You get $9 million in cash, they get $10 million in tax credits. They will use that and file that with their tax credits and owe the government $10 million less or $9 million in costs. That's where they make their million, and you got $9 million in cash.
And that $9 million in cash that I would receive is federally tax exempt?
I don't quote me on it, but I think so. I don't think you then, like, if you had to then pay income tax on that or pay taxes on that, like, that kind of defeats the whole purpose.
That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm total newbie here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody has an answer, come grab me.
Sometimes you get the great, if you get my card afterwards, I'm happy to find an answer.
Thank you, Michael.
They're in the back.
Are you modeling out any associating maker's depreciation with your software, or?
Sure, so I'm going to take a leap as to where I think you're going with this. So the depreciation on a project in tax equity can be monetized. So the tax equity partner can use that. And the tax credit model, you can't actually monetize the depreciation. So that has to still be used by the project owner. So we're not modeling depreciation, we're pretty much strictly doing tax credits, although we've tinkered some with tax equity. That's a more complicated deal. Was that kind of where you were going with this?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Are those only on existing assets, or can it be on an asset that you are in the process of building out?
The tax credits, I mean, we solely work on assets that are planned and are in development. So but you can't realize the value of the tax credits until the asset's built. So what you're trying to do usually is line up someone that says, hey, I will buy this when it's built. Let's go, through the song and dance, sign agreements and stuff. We're going to buy it, and you're going to promise you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and I promise to buy it at this price when everything is done. Let me know when it's done. So you're trying to line that up, and then once you have that commitment, that helps you go to the bank and the investor say, hey, Jason said he'd buy the tax credits for 90 cents on the dollar as long as we do X, Y, Z. Yeah, that looks good. Jason looks good for it. Cool. We'll give you the loan, and I know that you're going to get this. Usually they'll often pay back kind of the bridge loan or the construction loan, which you'll take as a short-term loan to get the project built. There are some instances, there's also, all of this is kind of about, that's an investment tax credit. There's also a whole other thing called a production tax credit, which is paid, has nothing to do with the cost of the project, and only has to do with what the project has produced. So every megawatt hour of clean energy pumped out, you get a certain number of dollars. So like the Ocotillo wind farm, that's what's called a merchant project. That means the energy is not contracted, it's just sold into a wholesale market at a fluctuating price. But they are getting PTCs, production tax credits. They got no investment tax credits, but instead they elected to get paid for energy produced as it is over the next 10 years.
You can't, and it's either or, you can't.
It's either or, you cannot do both. It's one or the other. So that's another way. Usually, the problem with these assets is they're usually very costly to build. So usually, a lot of players will say, I'm going to use this to help with that upfront cost. But if for some reason maybe you've got a grant or the economics just make more sense to get paid out over time, that's another way you could go. And both of those are sellable or transferable. Yeah.
So another follow-on question. So let's take the example of a production tax credit. Does it need to be sold or exercised in the year in which it's accumulated, or can you carry it forward in subsequent years and then exercise it at a future date? Outside of that tax?
Yep, you can carry it forward 22 years and backwards 3 years.
Okay.
But you have to try to use it in the current year first.
Okay.
And so most parties are looking to, and you don't really achieve the financial benefit until you use it. So if like, I'm gonna take a few years to use it, or I can't use it until next year, that's gonna kind of lower your return on that investment, and make that look like a less good. But it's a nice that it's not a use it or lose it. So if you can't, for some reason, use it all, you can carry whatever you can use forward.
Thank you.
Okay, in the back.
Have you done any looking like comparatively at what the power of like these investment types or tax credit types are compared to like incentives into fossil fuels? That like I look at and wonder, the federal government has financial programs for both. Where are these at? And like if cities are to be a voice in saying like do more, give us more stuff that we can do, is this like a drop in the bucket compared to whatever subsidies or incentives go to fossil fuel production, or do you know? In my head I'm trying to like compare bubble sizes.
I don't know. I don't know if anybody in the audience happens to know off the top of their head, but and I think some of the fossil fuel incentive, or I think Biden has spaced some of those out, probably not all of them, so I'm not sure. I think these are very generous. These make a big difference. We often, because we're a marketplace for both of these, we'll often start with a project on the tax credits and say, can we help make the project happen with the tax credits? And if so, great. And what you do with the RECs, I don't care. If you need more support, fantastic. Let's figure out what that is and figure out how to bring that to the project. So I think the tax credits are very consequential, but they aren't always enough on their own. So, yeah, go ahead.
What's both the smallest system sizes as well as the largest system sizes your team has brokered on the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can't, I think we talked about the homeowner one earlier. So I think the smallest we've done is about $400,000 of tax credits, ITCs. So that was a sub 1 megawatt project. And we've been involved in deals up to $100 million of tax credits on a single project. So they range a lot, and you're dealing with very different counterparties and different, back and forth, and you get into like tax credit insurance and cost segregation, all kinds of fun stuff. This link here, because you can go really deep on this stuff, and there's some other people that have done a really good job going deep on this and have some free resources. So I have a link to these slides and some of my favorite links, and I tried to go deeper on what would be useful to cities in this. So there's a few things in there on how cities can use the IRA and the tax credits. Just go to Ever.green/MT2030. Yeah. Did I answer all your questions?
Yes, you did.
Great.
I was just gonna say, I just went to that link and it said I needed to request access.
Fantastic. I will fix that. Fantastic.
Yep.
Do you have any resources to help with compliance on like the domestic content and prevailing?
Yes. I would say we know a lot of what it takes and work with partners to kind of work on that. So prevailing wages and apprenticeship, if your project is, this is probably one of the most important ones. Let me go back. How fast is this? Okay, so this graph's a little confusing, and we have all kinds of fun internal team debates about is this the right way to visualize it. This is my favorite way. So, doing the talks, I get to choose. The prevailing wage, so all these are like, you're gonna get, an extra 10%. Prevailing wages is actually a 5x multiplier. So the base credit is 6%, energy community is only 2%, and domestic content is only 2%. If you pay prevailing wages, all three of those get 5x'd. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. It makes no sense to not make sure you're paying prevailing wages in apprenticeship. The cool thing is, you automatically qualify if your project is less than a megawatt. So most C&I projects, yep. So if you're bigger, you got to think about this. There are definitely programs and stuff out there to help kind of with that. It goes down to like the contractor and the subcontractor. If you've got a team that's smaller than like 3 or fewer, I think it's like 4 is the limit. Yeah, so you know, it's
Do you have
hairy.
resources to help, like, because the onus is on the taxpayer, even if you're like a municipality. How on earth do I, in the sustainability department,
You need
keep
to,
track of
yeah.
prevailing wage for like many contractors?
So
and stuff?
I'd say require and verify. Like this should be a requirement of anybody you're working with, right? Like, hey developer, this is what it takes. You got to do it, man. You got to be collecting pay stubs. Are you doing it? How are you doing it? What are you? So like, ask a lot of questions. Put it in your contracts. Make sure that they're on top of that. They're probably not. We've talked to many developers like, oh yeah, I've dealt with like labor and unions, no problem. They have no idea what needs to be documented here. It's similar to Davis-Bacon, but not exactly the same. So it gets a little crazy. And if you still have questions, feel free to reach out. We know of some partners that are working on this, and I think there's other players that are. I think because this is all so new, I would say the cost of those compliance programs are a little higher than I'd like to see them at. We've looked at, hey, do we build that stack ourselves? And we're a small company, we've got to be thoughtful about where we put our resources, but I could see someday us building that. So yes, that's a really important one. And it's the domestic content. The other thing I'll say about the prevailing wage is the one you can't necessarily go back and fix at the end. If you don't pay prevailing wages or you don't have enough apprentice hours 1 week, you can fix it. There's corrections, or I can't remember the word. There's something you can do or pay to fix it.
You have to show like best intentions.
But you have to have done it like then. So this is one you really want to pay attention to at the start of the project. It involves really kind of all the on-site labor. It doesn't involve like the engineering people designing the system, but it's all the people kind of constructing and building and operating. Apprenticeship now doesn't apply in the operation. That's something they clarified recently. But yeah, it's complicated, unfortunately. Yeah.
Has it been fleshed out, investment versus production tax credit? Let's say one legal entity is building, so they're doing the production, or sorry, the investment, and then another legal entity is actually later doing the production, like maintaining, operating the plant.
It's the same project, you can only do one or the other.
Is it the same project, or is it 2 projects, one to build it, one to operate it?
No, a project is built and operated.
Yeah, so they kind of both.
You can't say, well, I built it, so I want to do this, and I'm operating, I want to do that. No, a project is the same project, so that's
So they thought through that.
It's
yeah,
the asset.
They thought through that.
It's based on the asset.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Feedback? Complaints?
Can you make like a coloring book?
Sounds great, yeah.
I have no idea what just happened, but